And the Times' Peter Brooks resurrects the naked organist famous from Monty Python. I'm not sure you want to contemplate that image for too long. The Chancellor on an organ playing the same old tune of austerity. Well, joining me to discuss all that are Sonia Sodha of The Observer and Christian May, the editor of City AM. Welcome to you both. Right, okay, let's start with this early election. Are you buying that?
I'm not. I think Jeremy Corbyn is a big factor, actually, in both people arguing for an early election and against an early election in the Conservative Party. So I think those arguing for it say, you know, Labour are doing so badly in the polls. We just don't know what's going to happen over the next 2-3 years. Things could get more difficult with Brexit, with living standards. Let's go to the country. But I think what will be playing on Theresa May's mind is, first of all, the fact that she's very risk-averse and said she's not going to have an election, so it would look a bit funny now she did. But also, I think there's a concern in the Conservative Party, if they go to the country and Labour does terribly, maybe Labour will actually get their act together and knock Jeremy Corbyn off the top spot, and that could not be great for the Conservatives.
I mean, from the point of view of your readers in the city, would it be a responsible thing to have an election? After all, we've had an election every year now since 2014 of one kind or another.
I think that a certain degree of stability is what a lot of people in the city would be clinging on to at the moment. But the question over the election is that if it's run now, it's essentially risks becoming a rerun of the referendum. And never mind the state of Labour, which we can all accept is pretty diabolical. But the Liberal Democrats would probably benefit hugely. They would be the Remain party in a general election campaign. And as Sonia says, the more the Prime Minister says she's not going to hold a general election, the slightly dodgier it looks when she decides she will. And there's not a very elegant way to achieve it with the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. You either have to trigger and win or lose a vote of no confidence in yourself, or you have to convince the majority, including Labour, to back the idea. So at the moment, it seems it would be run as a rerun of the referendum campaign, which probably risks undermining a lot of what Theresa May is seeking to do.
I mean, the biggest reason why she's been advocated to do it is to build up a majority to deal with Brexit, but then, of course, dealing with Brexit is the largest obstacle, if you like, to calling an election, because it would be a bit of a diversion from it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think her slim majority isn't really getting in the way of things too much, because Labour is so weak as an opposition at the moment. I have to say, though, if I was the Prime Minister, politically, the calculation that I would be making would be, it is right to go to the country, and the sooner the better, because I think things are going to get trickier with Brexit. I think she'll have a much easier claim to a mandate if she's gone and sought an election for the sort of Brexit deal she negotiates. And actually, you know, something that I think we're going to probably see in the budget today, a higher inflation forecast, which are really going to eat into people's living standards, which means that people aren't necessarily going to be feeling so good about the economy in 2020. So if I was her, I'd be going for it, even though I sort of agree with Christian. It's maybe not what the country needs right now.
Now, what about those pesky lords, led by Lord Heseltine, mangy lion or whatever Quentin Letts says he is?
Lord Callanan, who's the former Tory leader of the European Parliament, written in the Telegraph today, revisiting an old theme of his, that the Lords is made up of crusty elites with disdain for the demos. I think if you are somebody like me who favours pretty radical reform of the upper chamber, then what we've seen in the last few weeks, not just their performance on Article 50, but also the BBC documentary that's been going out on the law.
Hasn't done
them a lot of favours. So I think there is a growing case, actually, that they should be reformed. But then that's never gone away. There's always been a bit of momentum towards that.
I mean, the problem for progressives like The Observer, if you like, is that you don't like the Lords, but you do like what they're saying on
and I think, I mean, I agree with Christian. I support Lords reform. I think at the very least their numbers need to be reduced. You've got, you know, the largest sort of second chamber, one of the largest second chambers in the world, which just seems a bit crazy. But they are part of our democratic system as it exists. I think it's a bit rich for some people who are really complaining about what the Lords are doing. I mean, some of them have been in government for 5 years. Well, if you think the Lords are so fundamentally anti-democratic, why don't you get on and reform them? And I think they serve a really important purpose in providing a check on a very powerful government. Labour is incredibly weak at the moment. I don't think it did the job of providing proper opposition on the Article 50 bill. And that's where I think the Lords come in. It's their job. They're a scrutiny chamber. So yes, I would like them to be reformed, but if you're going to, you know, sit in government and say, well, they're anti-democratic, well, I'm sorry, you should have reformed them by now.
Now, what about Heseltine? I mean, he is an impressive figure, man that I dealt with over the years, but this morning he came out and said he can't recall ever having met the Prime Minister, even though he's been a government advisor on 5 topics, and then went on to say, slightly unfortunately on International Women's Day, that being Prime Minister was a man-sized job.
Yeah, I saw Sky News pulled him up on that, rightly so. This was, I think, last night the first time he'd voted in the upper chamber in about 18 months, which is not uncommon for members of the Lords. And I think there was a nice line from the BBC's Nick Watt last night, who said that here was a man who brought down the country's first female Prime Minister and has just been fired by its second. But if he hasn't met the Prime Minister, you wonder quite exactly what he was doing in his role as a government advisor and whether the country will continue to sleep at night.
He was a hangover from when George and Dave took over.
Well, that hangover is wearing off.
Although apparently he's in the department 3 or 4 days a week. He's definitely a bit of a giant on industrial strategy. Apparently the Secretary of State for Business and Industry kind of quite values having him around. So I mean, it's not a surprise what Lord Heseltine's view on Europe are. I mean, I think we're probably pretty aware of them right now, and it does look a bit churlish, I think, to sack somebody who is very established in the field of industrial policy when it is a government priority. It's not like he's a minister.
I mean, quite good going to get sacked for rebellion aged 83, though, isn't it? It's good.
And the first time I think he has lost a government role.
Well, he resigned, of course, famously over Western.
Quite right, that one. Yeah, but he, I'm sure, will still be available on the phone to Greg Clark and others who want to pick his brains on industrial strategy, but you can't essentially lead a Lord's rebellion and remain in government post.
Right, I think, well, Afghanistan is too complicated to go in when we need to talk about the budget, and we can do it through the cartoonists, which we've had today. I mean, the first thing is a lot of argument going on Twitter saying they don't call him Spreadsheet Phil, it's just been invented. Does anyone call him Spreadsheet Phil? I mean...
Well, I don't know the extent to which that happens. I'm sure there aren't Treasury civil servants going around calling their boss Spreadsheet Phil, but I think it's, in some ways it's quite a good name for him. But I really like this Times cartoon because it's sort of, he himself, I think, has really cultivated this boring accountant's image. I'm not going to be flashy. I'm not pulling the rabbits out of the hat like George Osborne. I'm not being photographed eating my Byron burger, working on the budget late at night. But, I think there's actually, I also think the Telegraph cartoon has got it right now, because although he's trying to say nothing to see here, not going to be flashy, he actually is, in all the main respects, continuing the austerity policies of George Osborne. He's singing the same tune as George Osborne. There isn't really a lot of change there. And, it's still a budget, I think, that is overall going to deliver a lot of tax cuts, corporation tax cuts that disproportionately benefit more affluent families, while really hitting low-income working families through benefits and tax credit cuts.
Christian, he apparently told the Cabinet that a boring budget is a good budget, but is that actually because he's really naked, as depicted by Brooks in the Times? Yeah,
the Brooks cartoon makes you think actually you wish you were invisible. Sonia's right in the sense that he is going to continue the same tune because he has the same fiscal constraints that previous chancellors have had to endure. But
is he good enough just to be boring then?
I think a dull budget is a successful budget in this instance. He doesn't have the sort of political ambition, that polished ambition of his predecessor. George Osborne didn't put a single comma on the budget document without it being in the consideration of his own political objectives and political ambitions. So the fact that we have a man here who is, I think also on Brexit, he was a noted Remainer who has become one of the more pragmatic Brexiteers, and his budget is going to reflect that. I think a dull budget that isn't seeking to spend where he doesn't have the money, and one that, in his own words, wants to put a bit of money aside for a Brexit fighting fund, is sensible, because, as Sonia says, there are going to be inflationary pressures and other pressures.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. Just one line from Roger Boys. He says that Moscow, Islamabad, Pakistan, China, the Taliban and Iran are all lining up against the United States on Afghanistan, and he calls them Rogues United. So that may keep our foreign correspondents busy for some years to come. This is All Out Politics. Coming up next, remember this guy? What would he think today? We'll speak to George